Thank you so much for joining us. What would you say is the main achievement from this trip?
Thank you very much, Lulu. Indeed, this is a very important visit by President Jacob Zuma to Tanzania. You'd recall the historic relations between these two countries. They date back from the time when the country, South Africa, or the liberation movements were engaged in a struggle. So what happened was that Tanzania was very frank, Lulu. Tanzania said, we played our role during the struggle days. We expect South Africa also to play its role. Given that South Africa is actually an advanced economy, they have an expertise in a number of areas, particularly mining, tourism, and other sectors. So what they want to see from South Africa is more investment coming this side, because that will help this country lift up and actually develop. So that is one of the things that really came out. And you'd recall, Lulu, that the two also decided to elevate the nature of relations that they have. Currently, they signed, rather, in 2011, an agreement to elevate these relations, but it had not been effected. And then they decided today to then put that to paper, to put pen to paper, to make sure that the relations between Tanzania and South Africa are elevated to a level of a binational commission. And what that means, it means that commission will be chaired by both presidents. And then once it's under both presidents, it means they can be able then to monitor progress, to make sure that agreed programs are implemented, Lulu.
Now, Mzwandile, with the binational commission that has been agreed on and has been officially launched, what's the way forward after this? Yes, both presidents will chair the commission, but in terms of monitoring, what exactly are they going to be doing going forward?
You know that President Zuma came along here with 6 ministers. There were about 4 agreements, or rather memoranda of understanding, that were signed. One of those relates to environment and transport. One of the key areas that the new president of Tanzania is embarking on is infrastructure. The infrastructure of road, the infrastructure of rail. And then, given that South Africa has knowledge in those sectors, so it will come in handy. So it means the principals, the presidents from both countries, will then have the responsibility to make sure that they monitor those agreements that have been entered into and make sure that they get implemented, because it's pointless to then sign agreements. At the end of the day, they sit at the corner and gather dust and nothing gets really actualized. So the reason why it goes to the highest level, to make sure that it really gets monitored and it gets followed through. I'm mentioning an example of an infrastructure because President Magufuli is very serious about uplifting this country. That is why he made a very direct call to South Africans to say, we helped you South Africans during the struggle. It's the time that you help us. And then you come this side, you'll find that there is a treasure that really needs to be unearthed. And it will really help both countries. Not only will Tanzania benefit from your expertise and experience, but South African economy as well will get a huge boost.
Now, Mzwandile, more than 150 South African companies are currently operating in Tanzania in areas such as the financial services sector, hospitality and leisure, as well as ICT. Now, the scale is generally tipped in South Africa's favor with the new commission and the monitoring and developing of relations between the two countries, and going back then when they assisted South Africa during the apartheid era. Tanzania, therefore, is hoping to change this. When they say there's treasure in Tanzania, apart from what is already taking place from South African countries investing in Tanzania, what else is there for South Africa?
Lulu, as you have correctly mentioned, that the scales are tipped in favor of South Africa, and that is not that shouldn't surprise anyone. because, as I've said, South Africa is really developed, so which means its infrastructure is way ahead of Tanzania. That is why Tanzania is saying, for us to be able to be competitive with countries like South Africa, we need an infrastructure that will make us to be on par with countries like South Africa. That is why they insist that we need huge investment in this country, because once that investment comes into this country, it means the infrastructure will be at the level of South Africa. And then you can start talking about the balancing of trade. But at the moment, you're talking about countries, one which is quite far ahead, the other is still really struggling to pick itself up. But I must add, there is a lot of infrastructure work that is going on. I mean, if you come to the city center, you can see the roads are being built, the bridges are being built. So it means they are serious. And that's where South African companies can come in. In construction, South Africa is very strong. And in the banking sector, South Africa is very strong. And actually, President Magufuli made it clear that even their beaches, saying they have a coastline of about 1,400 kilometers. So he needs those coastline and those beaches to be developed so that it can be able to attract tourists. He actually highlighted that he is encouraged by the number of South Africans who keep visiting Tanzania, and you know that these parts of the world are generally warm. I mean, South Africa is becoming cold because it's winter, but here it's very warm. If you would have beaches that are developed, people can be able to take what they call a left turn, and then they'll be able to enjoy the sunshine even in winter.
Now, Mzwandile, in a twist of tragic coincidence, both countries are reeling from bus accidents that claimed lives of many school children. The Transport Minister, Joe Maswanganyi, forming part of President Jacob Zuma's delegation to exchange views with his Tanzanian counterpart. Do we know what the two talked about?
Yes, Lulu, they spoke about infrastructure relating to transport. In fact, President Zuma also conveyed the condolences to the Tanzanian. You remember those many children that were killed. And the same happened in South Africa about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And then these two again spoke about the need to say it's not good enough to only talk about the past, to say when we were here we were treated very well, so we were given the possibility of being able to launch the struggle successfully to free South Africa. That is not enough. What is important is that given that these countries were intertwined because of the struggle, now is the time for people of these countries to benefit. So that is why they decided to now focus primarily on economic matters. Economic matters are very vast. You mentioned in your intro there that South Africa has about 150 companies here. In fact, they more than that, they over 200. So you can see everywhere you go, even at the hotel where we're staying, you meet every South African from different sectors. We actually were on the plane with a farmer from KZN who said he was coming here to meet some of the people because there were potential areas that he was looking at, because he said he was farming timber. So you can see that all the governments or all the presidents need to do is to enable this environment, because South Africans do indeed indicate that they are interested in coming to a country like this, Lulu.
Now, Mzwandile, you mentioned something that's very key, the fact that South Africans have mentioned that they are comfortable and happy and focused on working on developments in Tanzania. In terms of bilateral relations going forward and looking at what South Africa is doing with Tanzania in terms of developments and the bilateral commission, are we likely to see more of these relations being built in the region on the African continent?
One of the key areas, Lulu, that came out from this state visit was that the presidents stressed the need for intra-trade in Africa, because you know that trade is still very low. It's anything between 12% and 15%, which is very low in a country, or rather in a continent of 1.2 billion people and in a continent with vast resources. So if you start at home, as they say, charity begins at home. So as neighbors, they should be able to lead the way before they can go out. I mean, if you look now, most African countries rely on outside countries to fund their projects. Yet they have resources that are untapped, either because they don't have skills or perhaps in some areas there is no will. So that is why a state visit of this nature is very important, knowing that a country like South Africa really can contribute. And of course, if Tanzania would also be able to assist a lot because our economy, Lulu, is doing very badly. So you need that kind of injection to lift our economy. And in this country, as much as it's not doing very well at the moment, but you don't have a problem of the youth unemployment that we are experiencing in South Africa. So this is very important in terms of lifting the intra-trade Africa. And of course, there is a railway line that this country is embarking upon from the southern border of Tanzania. So it will help a lot. So with Minister of Transport, Joma Songanyi, having been here, so all those areas are being looked at. So we hear that also a state-owned entity like Transnet is really getting involved. So you can see that Tanzania and President Magufuli is very clear that South Africa, you are welcome. So if you want to do business, this is the country that you can come and do business with, because he also emphasized that this thing of barriers and people not being able to trade with themselves is really problematic. So it's upon them as leaders to then make sure that they remove them, and then for business people, they'll be able to do their business, Lulu.
Mzwandile, we'll have to leave it there for now. Thank you so much for joining us. That was our presidential correspondent, Mzwandile Mbeje, joining us live from Dar es Salaam in Tanzania.